learned only in the sense that we made mistakes on judging the future economics of the business, which would have had nothing to do with due diligence. We regard what people normally refer to due diligence as really sort of boilerplate in most cases. It's a process that big companies go through, and they feel they have to go through it, and they're ignoring, oftentimes in our view, they're ignoring what really counts, which is evaluating the people they're getting in with it and evaluating the economics of the business. That's 99% of the deal. You may run into an environmental liability problem, one time in a 100, or you may find a bad lease. I asked Melvin about, do you have any bad leases? I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. And I can read them all and try and look for every clause or something, but it isn't going to, that is not the problem. We've made lots of bad deals. We made a bad deal when we bought Hochschild Kohn, for example, a department store operation back in 1966. But it had fine people, but we were wrong on the economics of the business. But the leases didn't make any difference, or that sort of thing just was not important. And I can't recall any time that what other people refer to as due diligence would have avoided a bad deal for us.
I can't either.
No, that's 30-some years. And the key thing, you just don't want to do. I'm on various public company boards. I've been on 19 public company boards, and their idea of the due diligence is to send the lawyers out and have a bunch of investment bankers come in and make presentations and all that. And I regard that as terribly diversionary, because the board sits there, entranced by all of that, and everybody reporting how wonderful this thing is and how they've checked out patents and all that sort of thing. And nobody is focusing really on where the business is going to be in 5 or 10 years. And business judgment about economics and people to some extent, but the business economics, that is 99% of deal making, and the rest, people may do it for their protection. I think too often they do it as a crutch, just to go through with the deal that they want to go through with anyway. And of course, all the professionals know that. So believe me, they come back with the diligence, whether due or not. And we are not big fans of that. I don't know how many deals we've made over the years, but I cannot think of anything that traditional due diligence has had a thing to do with. And
no, we've had surprises on the favorable side a couple of times.
That is true. That is true. The kind of people that we've generally dealt with have usually told us the bad things first and good things after we made the deal. We made a deal with a fellow over in Rockford in 1969, Eugene Abegg, the Illinois National Bank and Trust Company. I made that deal in a couple of hours, and I mean, there just wasn't any way that Gene was going to be hiding anything bad. For the next 10 years, when I went over there, every time I go to lunch, he'd point out some building in town that we owned that wasn't on the books, or some foundation we had that had money in it that he hadn't told me about. And he even gave me some bills, one of which I carry in my pocket, that he had still sitting around that were issued by the bank, that were our own money, which he never told me about. We could cut them out like paper dolls. I mean, Gene was not a guy to show all his cards. And those are the kind of people we've generally dealt with. And I would certainly say that that Melvin and Shirley fit that description in spades. We're now at 3:30.
I get that question fairly often, often from lawyers. In fact, we talked to Munger Tolles, the law firm, and that was one of the questions I got, why we didn't do more due diligence, which we would have paid them by the hour for. It's interesting. We've made plenty of mistakes in acquisitions, plenty, and we made mistakes in not making acquisition. But the mistakes are always about making an improper assessment of the economic conditions in the future of the industry or the company. They're not a bad lease. They're not a specific labor contract. They're not a questionable patent. They're not the things that are on the checklist, for every acquisition by every major corporation in America. Those are not the things that count. What counts is whether you're wrong about whether you've really got a fix on the basic economics and how the industry is likely to develop, or whether Amazon's likely to kill them, in a few years, or that sort of thing. And we have not found a due diligence list that gets at what we think are the real risks when we buy a business. And like I said, we certainly made at least a half a dozen mistakes, and probably a lot more if you get into mistakes of omission. But none of those would have been cured by a lot more due diligence. They might have been cured by us being a little smarter. It just isn't the things that are on the checklist that really count. Assessing whether a manager who I'm going to hand $1 billion to for his business, and he is going to hand me a stock certificate, assessing whether he's going to behave differently in the future in running that business than he has in the past when he owned it, that's incredibly important. But there's no checklist in the world that's going to answer that. So if we thought there were items of due diligence, and incidentally there are a few that get covered. I mean, you want to make sure that they don't have twice as many shares out as you're buying or something of the sort. But if we thought there were things that we were missing that were of importance in assessing the future economic prospects of the business, we would by all means drill down on those. But the question of, when we bought Seas, they probably had 150 leases. When we buy Precision Cash Parts, they have 170 plants. There's going to be pollution problems at some place, and that is not what determines whether a $32 billion acquisition is going to look good 5 years from now or 10 years from now. And we try to focus on those things. And I do think it probably facilitates things with at least certain people that our method of operation does cut down. You get into squabbles on small things. I've seen deals fall apart because people start arguing about some unimportant point, and their egos get involved, and they draw lines in the sand and all of that. I think we gain a lot when we start to make a deal. It usually gets done. Charlie?
Well, if you stop to think about it, business quality usually counts on something more than whether you crossed a T in some old lease or something. And the human quality of the management who are going to stay are very important. And how are you going to check that as by due diligence, And I don't know anybody who's had a generally better record than Berkshire in judging business quality and the human quality of the people who are going to lead the business after it was acquired. And I don't think it would have improved at all by using some different method. So I think the answer is that, for us at least, we're doing it the way we should.
Negotiations that drag out have a tendency, they're more likely to blow up for some reason. I mean, people, they can get obstinate about very small points, and it's silly to be obstinate, but people get silly sometimes. So I like to keep things moving. I like to show a certain amount of trust in the other person, because usually trust comes back to you. But the truth is there's some bad apples out there, and spotting them is not going to come from looking at documents. You really have to size up whether that person who's getting a lot of cash from you how they're going to behave in the future, because we're counting on them, and that assessment is as important as anything involved. We know all the figures and everything going in, and we know what we'll pay, and so we don't want things to get gummed up in negotiations. And I'm perfectly willing to lose small points here and then on a deal if I have the deal on the right terms. I don't believe in making and Tom Murphy taught me this. I mean, you just don't try and win every point. It's a terrible mistake. But you make a decent deal, and if you find something that bends a little different some way, that's okay. If you think it's bad faith and gives an indication of the character of the person you're dealing with, then you got another problem, and you're lucky if you find that out early.